This morning, it's going to come from three places. And the first is Ecclesiastes. And Ecclesiastes is that for every time and season that's where that comes from in that book. We're only going to read from chapter 7 and verse 14. And the writer of Ecclesiastes says, "When times are good, you should be cheerful. And when times are bad, think about what it means. God makes both of them to keep us from knowing what will happen next." I don't know about you, but that seems to be a little rotten. But good too. So then you go to the book of Galatians in chapter 6, verses 7 to 9. And in Galatians, Paul writes, and he's writing to the church at Galatia. So if you're not sure what Galatians is, Paul's writing a letter to them. You know, he founded a church there, and then he goes off, and so he's writing back to them, and he says, and he finds out that there's some things that are going on in the church. So here, this is what they wanted to know. In verse 7, he says, "You cannot fool God, so don't make a fool of yourself. You will harvest what you plant." I think those of us who are older, we grew up in the church, you will reap what you sow. Right? If you follow your selfish desires, you will harvest destruction. But if you follow the Spirit, you will harvest eternal life. Don't get tired of helping others. You will be rewarded when the time is right if you don't give up. That sounds a little better. And then from my favorite part, and John's going to get to hear this one twice because I actually shared these verses in the cabin on one night. Romans 8 verse 28, because, and those of you who heard me do memorials and services, I tend to include these all the time. And he says, we know, and Paul's writing to another church he founded in Rome, he says, "We know that God is always at work for the good of everyone who loves Him. They are the ones God has chosen for His purpose, and He has always known who His chosen ones would be. He had decided to let them become like His own Son, so His Son would be the first of many." The translation of that to the older English that you may be used to is that God is always with you, and there is nothing that can ever separate you from the love of God. This morning, I said we're going to be in week 2 of the Ask God. And these are questions that came from you. So it's, hey God, if you're all powerful, then what's with all the suffering? So I said a fourth of the respondents were concerned about forgiveness, and then an eighth of all respondents, this was the next item. If God is God, then why suffering? Have you ever asked that? Was that only the Dorsey folks, or did that include you guys too? Yes? No? Maybe?
Yes.
Okay. Good. So, if you were in that trouble at that time in your life, so what'd you tell yourself? You know, when you said, that was a good person. Why did that happen? Well, while we were down there, I got a text on, might have been Sunday. Yeah, I got a text on Sunday from my daughter saying that a fellow I went to high school with had run his motorcycle off the road going to Eastern Shore and ran it into a light pole. And Jeff Burson is dead. He's got kids, grandkids, But the description when I went online was Jeff was weaving in and out of traffic, zipped off down the ramp, and he didn't make the ramp. That's how the newspaper reports it. But Jeff rode his motorcycle that way. He was a good man. Good man. You see a picture of him, the obituary, he's 59, looks like he could still be the All-American he was in football. So why did it happen to such a good guy? That question was actually coming up. My daughter said on Facebook that people were posting, why do bad things happen to such good people? And that's where we were. Well, I want to play a little game. Said how many watch Let's Make a Deal in the morning, or have watched the Let's Make a Deal? So I used to watch the old show, and I knew what's come on. I watch it too. I like it. So, Ashley, we're going to play Let's Make a Deal. All right? All right. So your choice is going to be door number 1 or door number 1. What's that?
It's the same door.
Okay, but there's a prize in there. So you get door number 1 or door number 1. I mean, you have to have a choice. It'd be a lot more fun, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Does anybody else be satisfied with just door number 1? Could be a new car! We better hope let's hope it's a new kitchen when it ever gets finished. That's exactly part of the answer to the question. We are made in God's image, and God's image is one of free will. If you want God to take away all the bad stuff, then you lose choice. And if you lose the bad stuff, you gotta lose the good stuff. Because we can't decide which is good or bad. You know, we say, why does it happen to good people? Well, who decides who good people are? God says we're all good. We care when it happens to our family, our church, our friends. We forget. For those of us who didn't know Jeff Merson, wow, that's a sad story. For those of us who knew Jeff, that's a tragic story. It's the same story. It's all on how you view it. When we were at a conference this past year, back in June, and I did this with the kids at the table at dinner. I can't remember if John was at our table or not. But I told them they had to take their finger and put it above their head and draw circles counterclockwise. Okay? And they had to keep drawing them until it got all the way down to the middle of their chest. And then when they looked down on them, I asked them what direction the circles were going. Now the circles are going what appears to be clockwise. The difference was how you looked at it. The circle didn't change. But my viewpoint changed. My viewpoint of, wow, there could be a new car there, and there could be a zonk here, but Ashley wanted a choice. Dadgummit, she wanted a choice. Even if it meant she was going to get zonked. I said, by the way, you would have gotten zonked in both of them. There's nothing there. So, we're going to take a little bit of time and try to look at it maybe a little bit more academically. I won't spend a lot of time into that, but there's a Canadian philosopher who was questioning this, and he used a book by Peter Kraft and Ronald Ticelli. It's called A Handbook of the Apologetics. And they state this, that the problem can be summed up by the apparent contradiction between the following 4 propositions. See what it is. God exists, God is all good, God is all powerful, evil exists. So those are the 4 things. I didn't feel a lot of disagreement in that. I would go that. So then the authors say, here's 5 areas that address them. From an atheist view. From an atheist view, it said atheism solves the problem by denying, 1, that God exists. So if God doesn't exist, then there's no other problems. Pantheism, or the belief that God is everything and everywhere is God, it denies proposition 2, which is God is good. And it allows God to be both good and evil. There's people who say, well, you know, God could be good, God could be evil, because God sometimes does mean things to you and He gets even. Then there's polytheism, which is a belief in many gods. And what it denies here is proposition 3, is that God is all-powerful. Because God isn't all-powerful because there's all kinds of gods. And then fourth is idealism. And that's the belief that reality is a product of the mind. So it rejects proposition 4, that was evil exists. It's just whatever's in your mind. Just whatever you want life to be, it is. That evil's really just an illusion. It didn't really happen. But then there's Christianity. And Christianity says, on the other hand, that it says all 4 of those things are true. All 4 are true. And that it denies that there's any inherent contradiction in them. So if we go back and look, God exists, God is good, God is all good, God is all powerful, and evil exists. Is there any contradiction there? As a Christian, we say no, that God can exist and evil can exist at the same time. What I will tell you is that it's not a war. It's sometimes described as that. The battle between God and Satan, and they're, and one's throwing pitchforks and the other one's sending angels, or whatever the case is. That really is not what's happening. Satan or Lucifer exists because God allowed him to exist. He was an angel. He was an angel, had it all. He was sort of the right-hand man. He was the president's advisor. He was God's advisor. But then he decided that he wanted to be president. He wanted it all. And God said, that's not going to work. And there were angels that would do that routinely. All of the angels would do that. So Lucifer, or Satan, gets thrown out of heaven, and he gets to go down, and then every other angel that gets thrown out gets to go be with Lucifer. Hence, we now have hell. Right? So that's the evil part. God allows it. God created it. But God is never subject to it. So, how is the Christian solution then possible? Because it's always feasible that God would have a good reason for permitting the evil. A reason of which we are not aware. As long as this is logically possible, then there's no way to be contradicting. The authors, they then say, then however, God has not left us completely in the dark. The world is clearly not the best of all worlds. That's easy. They then say, but it's the best world God created, giving His commitment to give us freedom to be creatures like Him. In order to make us in His image, this is the best that He could do. Now, He could make it perfect, but once it was perfect, there's only door number 1. No choice to get zonked. There's no choice. You're going to get one car, one color, one size. You're going to get one house, one color, one size, one Bible, one translation, one way to see God. Everybody would give the same amount of money. Everybody would. Wow. And the trade-off for that is evil exists. God cannot make people freely choose to be good or freely love Him. Because He created us in His image. He's given us all the information that we need to love Him. But He is not going to drag us kicking and screaming. I would say there were miracles occurred this past week. I would say I laid my hands on more than one individual that I would consider a miracle, including myself, in coming to Christ. There are natural disasters. Wow! How perfect was this? I mean, I didn't plan a thunderstorm on Friday night. I said I wrote this message back before I left for camp. But natural disasters, the hurricanes, the earthquakes, all the terrible things that go on, why didn't God just stop them? He could. But if He stops them, maybe He's not going to choose. Suppose God's a skier. If God's a skier, that means you get weather in Maine 365 days a year. But you're a toes in the sand on a palm tree girl. You don't want that. Janet's giving me a thumbs up. But if we choose toes in the sand and the palm tree, and you want to be in Vail, Colorado in the winter, God created a choice. It is what it is. He said, more than that, the author said that God has done something about the problem of evil and suffering. And here it is. For most people, the problem of evil is not intellectual, but emotional. They want to know why God allows evil and suffering. When they can't get an answer, then they become angry. And they don't like a God who would permit them or others to suffer. This is not atheism or refutation but of a rejection. A child who's hurting needs reassurance. An intellectual explanation is not going to work. Atheism cannot supply reassurance. It can't do it. For those of you who follow us on Facebook, I registered a young girl at camp for us for this week. Her mom's name is Terry. Her grandmother's name was Marty. German. For those of us who know the story, Terry's dad died when she was about 2, and I sat here and gave children's sermons trying to find a way, and I remember talking to the Sunday school classes and teachers about how are we going to get a message across to a two-year-old, and we said, you know what, I can't imagine how they went through this without knowing God. How do you look at a two-year-old and say, oh, it's just over, just the way it is? She ends up at my camp this past week. Amazing. But in the Christian view, God has done something about the evil by giving us Jesus Christ. He does not just say, okay, I created you, now prepare to suffer. He has given us a clue, a deposit, a down payment on what it's going to be like in heaven, and then He's challenged us to help the suffering. We're called to be helping the suffering. Jesus endured suffering beyond all comprehension. We in the Protestant church, we leave our cross empty. There may be something to said about seeing Jesus with the nails in His hands on the cross in the Catholic Church as a reminder of His suffering. The difference is we believe in the joy of what we get because of that. This is what we've been given when life hands us lemons. That's how you make lemonade. Ultimately, He promises victory over death. Ultimate, which is the ultimate evil. Those who generally choose to accept or receive His forgiveness will rise from the dead and be transformed. Some of you know that. Some of you have lived lives that you look back and you wonder, why does God want me? I don't deserve any of this. And some of us look at each other and go, well, but He deserves it. And for those that we know deserve it, if you ask those people and looked inside, I will tell you that they wonder like I do every day. You know, there was more than one opportunity that I could have run the car off the road and hit a light pole. In fact, there was more than one opportunity that I was in condition that I probably should have run the car off the road and hit a light pole. There was more than one opportunity where I was talking to the kids in the back seat that I may have taken out half of my family because I wasn't paying attention. And yet there have been experiences in my life that one of my brothers died at a young age. I've stuttered all my life. Wow, so are those evil things? Are those bad things happening to somebody good? Said, who's to say? Depends on your view. This past week, this whole idea of these struggles happening to people, why it happens, and God wouldn't allow it to happen. On Wednesday night, in all of her pain, we come back to small group in the evening, and Eileen's really hurting. And yet she comes out in the room with the kids, and she was there when Mackenzie said, I have an announcement. And Mackenzie said, you know, I've been going to church, and I've been doing this, and I've never understood where the next step was. And she made that step, and we got to pray with her. We had 19 kids, probably 50 in the whole camp at least. On Wednesday night, I sat out on the pier until midnight listening to kids. I listened to them to support each other in what they deemed were tragedies in their lives. And some of the tragedy, and some were tragedies, and some were adolescent types of tragedies. But nonetheless, a tragedy at that time. We sat there and tried to figure out why one of the counselors would have fallen off having fun and broken 2 ribs, which we didn't know were broken yet. Was in a lot of pain. The kids wanted to know why 2 of the young men in the group were fatherless. And the boys shared that. Little boys should never have to bury their daddies. I would dare say that there's a whole lot of mommies and daddies in the room that would say, I'd rather do that than bury one of my kids. Perspective. We talked about why some young girls were so hurt by some young guy, or by a father, or by an uncle, or by someone else. Or why people just made fun of them because they were too tall, they were too skinny, they were too short, or they were too fat. The response is the same from Kraft and Ticelli. They said it's love, compassion, and Jesus Christ. And although the kids didn't philosophize about it, they accepted it. That so paradoxically, God is not banished because of the problem of evil. God Himself is the solution. A father dying on a motorcycle for that one young boy was not the fault of that little boy. Not little boy. Kyle was 13 or 14, or 12 or 13. But yet Kyle believes because his father wouldn't quit drinking, and because he wanted to go spend the time with his friends, and his father then went to the bar and wrecked his motorcycle and killed himself, that it's Kyle's fault. His father had free will. And Kyle loved his dad, and does love his dad. The other boy lost his dad because his dad had health conditions. And it sounded like his dad sort of managed him and sort of didn't. His father wasn't cursed, it just happened. Why is there suffering? There's suffering because God allows us to choose. We get door 1 and we get door 2. We can choose the new car, or we can choose suffering. Now, there's suffering with that new car. Because the more you drive it, the tires wear out, the brakes wear out. But it's still a new car. And it gets you places. This side got you nowhere. And that's where we are. Good things happen to bad people. Bad things happen to good people. People, children of God, live a life of free choice. The thrill of this world, or of the glory of salvation, comes through faith in Jesus Christ. Dozens of 8 to 20-year-old kids chose Jesus this past week. Why not us? Amen.